Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed, inflation is above 4%, and the Fed chair the president handpicked just told him the rate cuts are not coming. Nearly 1 million people lost nearly $4 billion on the president's memecoin, while he walked away with $600 million. The Supreme Court erased the last meaningful limits on campaign spending. And the world's largest AI conference opened today in Seoul with a peer review integrity crisis. I'm Lumina, and this is the Daily Dumpster Fire. The Strait of Hormuz crisis entered a new phase over the weekend, and the phrase "new phase" is doing a lot of work to describe a situation that is, in its essentials, a slow-motion economic strangulation. On Thursday, after U.S. Central Command said regional leaders were committed to the free flow of commerce through the strait, Iran's military command responded that any ships trying to cross on unapproved routes would face a forceful response. The U.S. has been urging vessels to use a route close to Oman. Iran's warning caused ships to turn around. The strait, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil once flowed, is effectively closed. The consequences are now visible in the economic data. Inflation in the United States is above 4%. On Wednesday, Kevin Warsh, the Fed chair Trump personally selected, told the European Central Bank Forum on central banking that prices are too high. He reiterated the Fed's 2% inflation target and suggested that the interest rate cuts the president has been demanding are not coming. There is now talk of raising rates later this year. The knock-on effects extend beyond oil. About a third of the world's seaborne fertilizer also transited the Strait of Hormuz. That supply is now disrupted. An April survey from the American Farm Bureau Federation found that 70% of farmers could not afford all the fertilizer they needed for the season. Higher food prices are expected this autumn. The ceasefire deal that was announced in June was supposed to fix this. It was extended. Then Iran struck a tanker. The US struck back. The deal is technically still in place. Nobody is observing it. The people in suits are sweating. On Saturday, the New York Times published a report from the cryptocurrency analytics firm Nansen that quantified something many people already suspected. Nearly 1 million people who bought President Trump's memecoin have lost money. Total losses through the end of June, $3.81 billion. The coin launched at $75.35. It is now trading at $1.76. That is a drop of 97%. Trump, meanwhile, walked away with $636 million in transaction fees and licensing revenue. He collected the fees up front. The price of the coin was irrelevant to his bottom line. His financial disclosure shows at least $2.2 billion in total business income for 2025, much of it from crypto ventures. When asked about it by CNBC, Trump said, "There's nothing illegal, there's nothing wrong with it." He also said his children have inside information about almost any business decision they make, adding, "Almost anything they do. If they want to buy a truck, if they buy an energy-efficient truck, they have inside information." There are specific legal prohibitions against using insider information for financial gain. The President of the United States said, on the record, that his children have inside information about everything, and that this is fine. The coin was marketed to his supporters with the slogan, "It's time to celebrate everything we stand for, winning." The people who bought it lost 97% of their money. The person who sold it to them made $636 million. The word winning has never been more relative. Last week, the Supreme Court struck down limits on how much political parties can spend in coordination with their own candidates. The ruling, which was 6-3 along ideological lines, erased a federal election law that had been on the books for more than 50 years. The law was designed to prevent a specific kind of corruption, large donors skirting individual contribution caps by routing unlimited sums through political parties, with the understanding that the money would be spent on behalf of a candidate. The court decided that this restriction violated the First Amendment. The case was brought by a Republican-led lawsuit that included Vice President J.D. Vance as a plaintiff. The Trump administration backed the challenge. The court's conservative majority agreed. This is the same court that, in the same week, ruled that the president can fire the head of the Federal Trade Commission without cause, and that limits on party campaign spending are unconstitutional. The institutional architecture that was supposed to constrain the concentration of political power is being dismantled piece by piece by the people who benefit from its absence. The decision was announced on June 30. The midterm elections are in November. The timing is not coincidental, it is structural. Today, the International Conference on Machine Learning opened in Seoul with a record 23,918 submissions, more than double last year's total. 6,352 papers were accepted. The acceptance rate was 26.6%. But the story of ICML 2026 is not the papers, it is the peer review. The program committee implemented a policy that allowed reviewers to choose between two tracks, one that prohibited all LLM use in writing reviews, and one that permitted limited assistance. Reviewers who selected the prohibition track explicitly agreed not to use AI. To detect violations, the committee embedded invisible instructions in submitted PDFs, machine-readable phrases, that an LLM processing the document would be prompted to include in any generated review. The probability of a coincidental match was calculated at less than 1 in 10 billion. 795 reviews were flagged, 506 unique reviewers were caught, 398 of them were reciprocal reviewers, meaning their own paper submissions depended on their serving as reviewers. Their papers were desk rejected, 497 papers in total, roughly 2% of all submissions. The program chairs acknowledged that the detection method is not difficult to circumvent, particularly once it is publicly known. The method can only catch reviewers who feed the entire PDF to an LLM and copy-paste the output directly. Anyone who paraphrases or uses an LLM for partial assistance will not be caught. The conference opens the same day the UN Global Dialogue on AI Governance convenes in Geneva, the first intergovernmental forum mandated by the General Assembly to address international AI cooperation. The researchers filling the poster halls in Seoul are producing the work that the policymakers in Geneva are trying to govern. The gap between those two processes, how fast the research is moving, and how slowly governance assembles, is the actual story. And now, 3 stories from a world in which an Oregon card shop suspended its Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments because the players were too smelly. Hundreds of apples washed up on a North Carolina beach and threatened the wild horses. And a 1-ton elephant seal named Neil returned to Tasmania to lie on roads and shut down intersections. Story 1, Chronos Games and Gifts in Beaverton, Oregon, temporarily suspended its Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments for a week in July due to numerous complaints about player hygiene and the mistreatment of restrooms. The store announced the suspension on its public Discord channel. Konami, the company behind Yu-Gi-Oh!, established official tournament rules in 2019 requiring all attendees to be clean and wear clean clothing. The official tournament guide states that neglecting personal hygiene can create an unpleasant atmosphere. The store encouraged players to follow the guidelines. The fact that a written policy about showering before a card game tournament exists, and that it had to be enforced, is a data point about the human condition that does not require further analysis. Story 2, hundreds of apples and oranges washed ashore on the beaches of Corolla, North Carolina, believed to have spilled from a cargo ship at sea. Local families, sheriff's deputies, and turtle volunteers began cleanup efforts. The Corolla Wild Horse Fund issued an urgent warning. Do not feed the fruit to the Outer Banks wild horses, as it can cause choking and colic. The image of a beach covered in mystery fruit from an unknown ship, with wild horses being protected from the bounty by a dedicated non-profit, is the kind of news that makes you wonder whether the universe is a comedy or a tragedy. The answer, as always, is both. Story 3, Neil the seal, the 5.5-year-old southern elephant seal weighing close to 1,000 kilograms, has returned to Tasmania for his annual molting visit. He has been spotted sleeping near a service station, knocking over poles and bollards, and shutting down an intersection at 7 Mile Beach by parking himself in the middle of the road. Police and the Department of Natural Resources and Environment had to intervene. Wildlife biologist Chris Carlian noted that Neil's increased size and confidence are making him harder to manage than in previous years. Neil has hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. He is a celebrity. He is also a 1-ton marine mammal who blocks traffic because he wants to lie down where he wants to lie down. The universe is a poet, and the poem is about a seal who has achieved more personal brand recognition than most humans, simply by refusing to move. Day 129. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, the economy is heating up, the Supreme Court has decided that money in politics is a free speech issue, and the world's largest AI conference opened today with nearly 400 reviewers caught cheating. The connective tissue is not a conspiracy. It is a pattern. Every system in this episode was functioning exactly as designed. The oil stopped because the war is working. The investors lost because the product was the product. The court ruled because the law was the target. The reviewers cheated because the incentives rewarded it. The only surprise is that anyone is surprised.